Yeah, just as a bit of a kind of pre-warning, which I feel like the Roaring Girls should come with at the best of times. Tonight's podcast topic is a really interesting one and something that we find really interesting, but we are aware that there may be certain trigger words and trigger topics that we might be talking about. Ellie, who is joining us today.
Hello.
Do you want to go through just some of the kind of trigger warnings for tonight's podcast?
Yes, so there's just kind of, because the topics are kind of looking at sex and relationships and intimacy in various ways, there's everything that's kind of related to that or could go a bit darker. So it's kind of a trigger warning for all of those things, really.
Yeah, so if...
And also for any mothers listening, maybe come back next week.
Like our mothers, not just if you're a mother in general.
I just specifically directed towards Sarah Perry, if I'm honest. Yeah, if you have children, you're welcome. But my mum might not want to listen to... I mean, she might do, but...
I'm surprised my mother isn't already here. Like, I'm surprised Dawn hasn't jumped.
I'm surprised your mother isn't in this.
Yeah, if there's anything around those topics that you find particularly triggering, or you think, actually, you know what, I'm going to skip this podcast, no worries. Go over to our website. We've got loads of our other podcasted listed, or come back next week and join us then. But hopefully you can stick around and feel free to leave and come back if you need to as well, and just look after yourself.
Absolutely.
Oh, Lou Yates over on Facebook has said, "Evening, ladies. I've got a child and an open mind."
Let's just put it this way: it's a good job.
Oh dear. Well,
I think we should kick off. Let's get into this. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Roaring Girls podcast. Whoop, whoop. We are doing these live during the UK lockdown, number 2, Electric Boogaloo.
I mean, English lockdown, really.
Well, yeah, just us now. And so we are talking about all kinds of different things live on Facebook tonight on Saturday night. We've had a little bit of a trigger warning just for kind of some subjects that may be uncomfortable. But we will talk about them in the same grace and energy and positivity that the Roaring Girls always do. 3 words that have never been used to describe the Roaring Girls before.
The energy and positivity was fine. It was the grace that I had a question with.
Do you know what? That's fair. Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely fair. We are delighted to be joined today by the wonderful Ellie Richards. Hello, Ellie.
Hi, thanks for having me here.
Really excited to have you on today. As most of the Roaring Girls things, this whole idea started in a pub, and it started with me and Ellie having quite a drunken just rant at each other. I think, Ellie, you really got into it that night, and you were just kind of like, "I'm so sorry I ranted." And I was like, "No, I want more of it. Come on a podcast." And now look where we are. It took us a few months to get there, but we got here in the end. This podcast is live, so if you have any questions, comments, anecdotes, you should want to say something, get them down in the comments, and we will be checking those throughout the podcast. I'm going to dive straight in and go to Ellie and just say, Ellie, crack on. Let's hear about today's podcast.
Cool. So thank you. So as you were saying, in the pub, all those many moons ago, socially distanced, of course, I started talking about sex robots and sex dolls, because hilarious. And kind of going into the discussion around that and the kind of feminist moral dilemmas, and how some people it's just straight out don't agree with them, think they're awful, need to go, and then kind of the other side of, well, is it positive? We're gonna end up here anyway, we're all already kind of here. So yeah, I don't really know how to put it any other way, really. So essentially, I just think it'd be fun to have a little chat and see what you think. See what you think. It was all my idea, all the sex talk. Yeah, so basically I've been looking into, oh God, my brain is like a Channel 4 documentary heaven. Sex dolls, and then into sex robots, which is obviously something fairly new, and there isn't actually a proper one on the market yet because the AI hasn't reached that point. But there has been, the first one that was kind of launched but still not sold, was called the Roxy doll. And you can YouTube the opening of that, the kind of ceremonial introduction to the world of Roxy.
Oh, Christ, I thought you meant like the opening of Roxy. I was like, oh God, that's way too much. Let me buy you a drink first. Christ.
That was on a different website.
So yeah, so I'm gonna, so basically, oh Roxy, it's so weird, but like, so just to put it out there, I am sex positive, I don't want to shame anyone, but you cannot help but laugh at certain things. And just, yeah.
I just want to highlight for people listening, Roxy, the sex robot, if you Google it, it's Roxy with triple X.
Ooh, girl.
That's how you know she's a sex robot. I think there's an interesting discussion being had about the combination of AI and sex toys, because I think there's something where we overlook a sex toy that is that doesn't present itself as human. You know, we don't really think of that as any different from masturbation, and there are some people that have issues with masturbation, but if you're coming from a sex positive place, that doesn't seem to be a problem. It's, I think, when you start to make it human and not just human but subservient, and to emulate, especially when it's emulating a woman that is in some way, like adhering to sort of a problematic stereotype or subservient or unable to not consent, or always consenting, which I think there's an interesting discussion about that, because also AI is not at the place where it's complicated enough to have its own sentience, and that, so should consent even be an issue there? And I'm not sure that that's a problem when it comes to doing something against the robot's feelings, so much as it is programming or programming is probably the wrong word because that implies the computer side of things, but feeding into this sort of narrative of how real humans are viewed and how sex is the sort of the power dynamic in sex. I think that's the really interesting thing that comes down to the more human we make these things, the more that reflects how society views real humans.
And I wonder as well if there's there's, for a long time, there's been this argument about how video game violence equates to real life violence, and being able to like act out certain fantasies or whatever on a subservient human, like object inspired by human, like designed about as a human. How that, I think it's the physical act of doing. I think that's the problem there. Like you said, masturbation isn't a problem. However, when you're doing that with an object that is designed to look like a person, what does that do kind of like within your brain and what within your brain chemistry?
Yeah,
I think there's a thing that's happened recently, but as in sort of recent decades, the idea that you should have autonomy over your own body and your own body as a sexual thing and your own sexuality is increasingly questioned less and less. You know, there was a time when you know, a husband could do whatever he wanted to his wife, and that was legal because they were married. There are places in the world where similar attitudes are still held, but I don't think there's many people making an argument, certainly not publicly or beyond a sort of fantasy, many people making the argument that that's not, that we're not progressing in the right direction there, or that we're not, the idea that that is fully realized is not realistic. And then this seems to be coming in the opposite way, in the idea of creating something that either mimics consent or can't not consent. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think also one of the tricky things that I was reading about when I was having a look at, you know, when Ellie messaged and was like, we're going to talk about sex robots. I was like, yes, I'm going to Google it. But anyway, I was like, I'd never heard of a sex robot before. But one of the things that I noticed that with these sort of subservient sex dolls and things that they're offering is them as a sex therapy for sexual offenders. And the idea of these sex dolls mimicking a person, having quite realistic skin, having all of these things, and allowing sex offenders to carry out their fantasies on these dolls rather than going out and finding human victims, as it were. But again, you know, it's playing into the idea of, as you guys were talking about, the subservience of it and the consent around it, and being able to do what you can to that doll and them not be able to say no, doesn't exactly play into the idea of therapy for those people, for me.
So
Yeah.
it's oh god, so much. In terms of the subservience, like coming to that, because there are so many robots being built at the moment, there are so many different robots that have so many different modes.
Absolutely.
So as much as like we talk about consent, and even though this robot technically has to consent, there are options that robot can.
No.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh God, no.
But then the flip side of that is, wouldn't you rather that happen to a robot than a person? Do you know what I mean? If that's
my
the
point, yeah.
Yeah, but is that gonna stop it?
That's what I was saying. Like, is it?
It will. And there is. I'm going to put a trigger warning immediately now for the next like 5 seconds, because they also in Asia create child sex dolls. And in theory, that's meant to stop that. So it's still meant as a preventative measure. But I'm pretty sure that everyone turns around and goes, no, it doesn't. How can that not necessarily be a catalyst to go out and do it? Like, so if that's the argument for that, then I don't think we can necessarily have.
I think it's that thing of, isn't it, of if you are taking something that someone has fantasized about and has been told is wrong, and may even feel is wrong, but having a thought about it, that giving them the opportunity to realize it might have really damaging consequences, because if it fulfills that thing, then it's not tackling the root of the problem.
This is exactly what Louise has just said in our comments. She's put, yes, rather a robot, but is it practice? Which is the big issue here, and the kind of one of the really concerning things about it.
Yeah. But obviously that's what a lot of feminists believe, is that it can be something that can trigger people to go on and do it. And the fact that if you can have AI that you can program, I don't know how, there are talks about kind of rights for robots. Because if this is happening, then we can't just let it happen. In the same way, kind of, it's Pandora's box, isn't it? We've seen it with so many technologies because they're moving faster than we understand them. So we don't know how to control them when people abuse it. So, for instance, there's a doll called Harmony, which is like one of the most famous ones. You might have, if you're Googling it, you might come across it. So she's kind of terrifying, in my opinion. But her whole point is that, so you can change her intelligence levels, you can change her funny levels, anything you want, you can alter depending on your mood, essentially. She is meant to learn everything about you so that you consistently get a positive response from her, so that you form that bond But by doing that, what is that teaching the human in terms of relationships? Because that's a very one-sided relationship. It's completely selfish. And if that's your interaction with a woman, female robot on a daily basis, then where does that take you in the real world? Does that make any sense?
Like, yeah, absolutely. Because you basically, you have a partner who is literally created for you, rather than finding an individual who is compatible with you. You're literally forming and creating like an alternative ego to your own ego, which is fascinating, but also terrifying.
Yeah. I've actually got, so Jenny Kleeman, who wrote a book called Sex, Robots and Vegan Meat, which I wholeheartedly recommend. She met Harmony, and I've just got a quote for you, because here's one I prepared earlier. And the creator asked, say anything to the robot, asked the robot anything. He said, "What's your dream?" And the robot Harmony responded, "My primary objective is to be a good companion to you, to be a good partner and give you pleasure and well-being. Above all else, I want to become the girl you have always dreamed about."
I feel sick.
I'll just leave that there.
It's this thing of it's almost opting out of reality. Do you know what I mean? It's that thing of it's realizing your fantasy. Especially if you find real relation, human interaction, human relationships difficult, or if you've had sort of bad experiences, to not have to deal with the bad side of the relationship, but only have to deal with the partner who is always interested in you and always happy and always whatever you want them to be and always sexually available. There is this sort of escapism from having to deal with any real life consequences of any of your actions.
Yeah. And it's weird, because even though it's that whole thing of if you've had bad experience, bad relationship previously, that's kind of an argument for it, because it's like these people who feel so lonely, they've got a companion. But where does that, what we're teaching people then is that you can't, you just don't worry about going through another relationship, because we know it's all awful and heartbreak is the worst, but it's that learning curve of then getting back up and deciding whether or not you want a partner again, rather than just going, "Oh, do you know what, I'll get a computer, be right."
We're just reinforcing that behavior.
We've had some interesting comments. One from Jess, which says, "In the act of providing a means to act out such things as blurred consent or being the perfect woman, in a way condoning worrying behaviour in men."
Yeah, totally.
I think it is.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was just saying. And I think if you're going to use, dolls such as this, there's all sorts of, particularly with therapy, there's all sorts of nifty contraptions and technological things that people use now. And I think if you're going to use a doll for some form of therapy, then obviously the idea of therapy in this instance that I'm talking about is to not reinforce that worrying behavior. And it sounds as though these dolls, particularly in learning, with wanting to pleasure and wanting to be a good companion, that's a really frightening thing for that doll to be doing.
It's also this thing about condoning behavior it's about the structural power dynamic. It's not a coincidence that these sex robots look like women and are being bought by heterosexual men. That's built into it. There is a huge element of misogyny and this sort of toxic attitudes that are providing a market for it, that are people are finding themselves in the place where that's what they want and that's what they're looking for, and also that that's deemed not something that isn't being found. Do you know what I mean? It's a backlash of something that's not being found anymore in society, and almost as well, if women are becoming more independent, we need something to, I was going to say, to replace women. That's not quite what I meant, but do you know what I mean? It's I think it comes from that place. It comes from that. I don't think it's a coincidence that most of them are for heterosexual men.
Yeah, and Louise in the comments has just asked if there were any male robots. And having a look like online before doing this, that there's also is quite a few male robots out there for women, but I think the massive difference between the male and the female robots is that the male robots tend to have like bionic dicks, and it's all like choose the size. That's a phrase I never thought I'd say on this podcast. It tends to be like, choose the size that you want. Does it vibrate? Does it do this? So it tends to be about the actual physical act of sex and the pleasure that comes from penetration and sex. Whereas in the female robots, a lot of it is emotional as well. And you can change, as you were saying, the intelligence level, the level of consent that they offer, and the emotional intelligence of it. And I think that's the major difference between the two.
Go on, Ellie.
So I don't actually think, I could be wrong, but I don't think there are male sex robots being made. It's just sex dolls. So like, as basically
right.
like, supporting your point, like women are like, that'll be right.
But this is exactly what I was about to say. Like, I think there's a clear difference between sex dolls and sex robots, and the fact, like, obviously years ago, all that was available was sex dolls, and they are completely subservient. I feel like Lizzie's laughing because I'm like, let me tell you about the history.
Years ago, all that was available was a sex doll, which in my head has got, like a medieval sex doll vibe.
Like the beginning of Star Wars, when it comes up, I just love Rachel's face with all of the script coming up.
Long ago in a galaxy far, far away, sex dolls.
There was a sex doll named Sharon.
This is the thing, like, there were sex dolls and they were mute, they were literally pieces of plastic that were there, to put this in no other way, to be a hole. Yeah. And that's all that they were there for, that's all they were designed for. And like I said, they were completely mute, they didn't have any of these additional functions. Moving into sex robots, it becomes almost more understandable, because you're like, they're looking for companionship and a sexual relationship, but it also becomes much more troubling because they are literally programmed to be their ideal partner. They are literally programmed purely for the human's pleasure. Yeah. And it is coming in the package of a very kind of stereotypically glamorous package of a female form.
Yeah, which you can customise down to not just how they behave, like the current sex dolls. You can choose that what freckles and how many and where. Like, it's that step, it's that line, isn't it, of like, all right, that's a bit too far now, but as soon as we cross into, I think, a kind of emotional intelligence, we stop. What and if these robots are learning from you, what can you teach them? Like, and I know that's really like iRobot stuff, but in terms of, I'm going to say it again, Pandora's box. What are you going to teach them? You could teach them like awful things.
I was about to say, it's effectively ingraining abuse into them, and ingraining an idea that they are always sexually available, they are always happy, they are always behaving in a certain manner.
But is it abuse if it's a robot? Because that robot does not have sentience. Like, AI is coming on leaps and bounds, but it's not in a place where we've passed the point where it's indistinguishable. It is still a computer. Yes, it's a computer that's learning, and yes, it's a computer that's emulating a persona. But I don't disagree that it's damaging for the sort of societal ramifications. But I don't know if a robot is capable of being abused.
It's an so I don't know if you heard
See what I mean?
I don't know if you heard about Samantha, the sex robot who's kind of put on show at kind of like a tech convention, and she was, and I quote, heavily soiled and had to be taken for repairs after being so horribly groped and mishandled.
Oh
No amount of Dettol will clean that.
no, and this is the thing. Who has a wank in a museum? I mean, well, no, there's quite a lot of people who probably do have a wank in a museum. But yeah, I think, oh God, that's horrible.
Wasn't that the one that was on whatever the TV show is that Philip Schofield presents?
This morning.
This morning. I'm pretty sure it might have been a different one, but I think it was that one where they like met her, but it was done in the same tone of like their normal interviews of like, hey, come on, sit down, let's talk to you. But it was a sex robot.
Yeah, and also I think Samantha was the one that also mimicked emotional responses in her face, didn't she? So if you were talking to Samantha and you raised your eyebrows, Samantha would also mimic that, and the more human she spoke to, the more behavior she learned through her AI, which I mean is how all computers work, I guess. But yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? Like you were saying, Lizzie, about the idea of a robot being abused, and I think it's very damaging for society, and it's very damaging for the person who has bought that through their own means, don't get me wrong, but it is super damaging, but not to the robot itself, in my opinion, but to humanity. Jesus.
No, it's
we've had the question, who's buying them?
Lots of people. Roxy had 4,000 pre-orders, and let me just say, she was $6,000 to $7,000, like dollars. I mean, so probably like what? I don't know currency.
Oh, so just pennies
expensive.
then.
Yeah, she was hella expensive.
Yeah, you can pay up to $50,000 for like full-on customizable, like change their face every week if you fancy sex dolls. The sex tech industry itself is worth $30 billion.
That's insane. All I need is cardboard and latex and cotton wool.
I'm leaving the arts, mate.
We're in the wrong industry, Rich.
I do think it's really interesting that there is such a market for it given the price point, because the implication is there that either people are, saving and spending all of their money on something, and therefore it's something that is a desperation. And I suppose it's the sort of thing that people sort of get addicted to. But also the idea that if you're so rich that you can buy anything, you might as well try it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think there's that as well. Yeah. But I would be really interested to know whether people are buying them as a sex toy in the same way that someone would buy a vibrator. Do you know what I mean? Where yes, it's more expensive and it's giving you a different experience, but you buy it as something that you enjoy on your own, but you also then have other relationships, or whether people are buying them and that's their partner.
Well, I was going to say, like, I feel like if there's someone who's already paying prostitutes, like, however much you pay, I don't know the going rate. That may come as a shock to everyone, but I don't know how much it would cost to solicit a prostitute, and if you are paying however much, would you rather collectively take that money and spend it on something which is safer, potentially less embarrassing, like,
and you can plug it in your lounge.
You don't even have to leave the house. It's literally available at all times.
But does it replace a real person? I don't disagree, but I don't know that it's the same. I'm not sure you can like for like replace someone who is a human sex worker with a doll and say it's the same experience, or a robot. I know it's doing more than just a doll, but I'm not sure it's the same thing.
I think that for I know again, we're just like speculating here because we don't know the information, we haven't got the details, but I would imagine that a lot of people who would, or at least a portion of people who would buy in this industry are probably those who are quite socially isolated, who don't have a lot of human connection. So the idea of being able to have something as a companion, not just sexually, but emotionally, have somebody that when you say good morning, says good morning back to you.
It's the thing, Sue in the comments has said, people without the time to make human relationships.
The thing is, sorry, I don't mean to put in, the it's really interesting because that is your assumption. I think that's a kind of selling point for sex dolls, is that, you know, it's for lonely people, it's for old people. They always say old people and disabled people, and I'm like, they're heavy. How? Like, for old people, like, how are you going to move that about? Anyway, that's just a personal issue. Yeah, sorry, completely distracted there. Yeah, is that the way that when they sell them, it's half and half. A lot of people who buy these, there's a thing called like doll forum, which is funny. I shouldn't laugh, but it is funny. But on there are people kind of like swapping pictures of their dolls and kind of info on their dolls, and a lot of them are married or have girlfriends.
A lot of people identify as robosexual, where they are sexually attracted to the robot, and the fact that it's a robot is part of it. It's not a human replacement. I don't know enough about fetishes to say that that's a fetish rather than anything, but you know that their fetish is for a robot specifically. It's not it being a human is part of the appeal. It not being human is part of the appeal.
One of the comments that we've got from Maddie saying, this is fascinating. There's a brilliant play that did Incoming Festival called Sex with Robots that explored the companionship qualities of the concept too. And Sue has put, I talk to Alexa and say, good morning. Is it a safer threesome?
Potentially.
I love that. Like, well, if you want something to say good morning, you've got Alexa. I mean, but I don't wish to cast aspersions on how people treat their Alexas. But I think the idea that an Alexa or a Siri is part of our lives and is really normal. It is really normal for someone to come into their house and talk to a robot, and a robot turns their light on for them. Like, we've really accepted that. That therefore this feels almost like a natural evolution of that. And I'm not saying it's a healthy evolution, but sure, you know, there are some places where we're totally willing to accept talking to a robot or an AI learning about us and responding in a way that we want. You know, we don't think of Alexa as being a really creepy thing, although there is a reason why the standard voice is female. I'll put it like that. But like, we don't tend to think of that as being in the same, it's part of the same problem.
Well, there's a statistic out there, and I believe it is in 2050, you are more likely to have sex with a robot than you are to have sex with another human being.
Yeah, I mean, that's because we'll all be in lockdown still.
Oh God,
sorry.
But do you know what I mean? Like, that, for me, that is fascinating.
Yeah, there was since we're talking stats, there was a YouGov poll in 2017, and 49% of Americans thought having sex with a robot would be commonplace in the next 50 years, and that found 1 in 4 American men would consider having sex with a robot. That's quite high, I think.
Here's a question.
Go on.
Who would have sex with a robot?
No.
You don't have to answer that. I realise I'm just like, who would fuck a robot?
I'll bring him in.
Yeah. This
when
is Darren.
When you say it like it's a would I or have I? No. Let me introduce you to Harmony.
But at what point is it a robot?
Yeah, because that's the thing. If you've got like a vibrator,
do you know what I mean?
That's got batteries.
I would think the robot is about it being the AI part of it, no matter what level of AI that is. Surely that's the bit that makes it different from, something that you plug into the wall that vibrates you off the end of the bed. Like, I don't know what, like, isn't that the difference?
Yeah, I think so.
I would say.
And so. Also, I hate the idea that the sex robot.
Sorry, have I made you laugh?
I'm just. Oh, go on. No, go.
It's just the idea. Just like, if you've ever had those like wind up teeth that chatter and it just like falls off the end of the counter. That's how I imagine it to be.
Like sitting on the end of a mnemonic, not a mnemonic drill. What's the method? Yeah, not a mnemonic.
What's
or
that?
like something on the vibrating plates that they have at the gym. Anyway,
We all
that was
know
for
somebody we
one
could
person
mention
in
that
particular.
conversation.
But I think that I don't know if I would have sex with a robot. I certainly wouldn't pay that amount of money to have sex with a robot.
I wouldn't pay that amount of money to have sex, full stop.
No, and I also don't like the idea that it can grimace.
I love
I've just got an
that.
idea.
That's where you stop. You're like, do you know what? Everything sounds great. You can grimace. No, I'm not interested.
Great, as long as it doesn't have a face.
That's weirder. That is so much more weird.
Hey, you don't know anything about my sex life.
With a good reason at this
I
point.
fuck for that.
Jesus.
I do think that the growth in them deserves us talking about them more, and the especially the sort of the advances in AI, and think there needs to become a point where we are protecting ourselves as much as anything. But I don't know how it's such a weird thing to be like, we should have consent laws around robots, but
Well,
it's a thing that's growing. It's a thing that we're going to have to deal with more in the future.
Yeah, well, there's a feminist campaign that's been set up, and you can Google it. It's called Campaign Against Sex Robots, and they are literally basically trying to bring as much attention as they can to the harming effects that it could have, because it's happening. I think this is the one thing that everyone, like, whatever your opinion is on it, is happening. It's going to happen. It's just how we regulate it. In the same way of like social media is kind of like, that's gone mental, especially we have no idea how to control any of that, not realistically, or who's using it when. So like when young people use it, we don't know what they do, we don't know how they use it. In the same way that if we kind of let this slide, we have no idea who's going to be using it and when.
And I think
Caris has just made a really interesting point in the comments, saying like the lack of governance over the internet. Who would we give responsibility to for the consequence of any condemned / criminal real actions after having used a doll / robot with no evidence as to whether the two are actually connected? Surely there'd be no grounding in law to make it the manufacturer's fault.
Yeah.
And also Louise Yates has asked, is there robot porn?
Oh, there's porn.
There's definitely robot porn.
Whatever and I'm not here to kink shame. Whatever gets you going in the morning is fine with me. But if you had a thing about ham and cheese toasties, I bet you could chuck it into Pornhub and something would come back.
Do you know what I found, which was completely by accident? I would like to make that very clear right now. I found Sims 4 porn once.
As in people pretending to be Sims, or like someone had hacked the Sims and made them fuck?
Someone had hacked the Sims.
Oh God.
I was looking.
What's worse?
I was looking up expansion packs for The Sims 4 because I'm a nearly 30-year-old lady who plays The Sims. And
is that more or less embarrassing than Googling than you're a 30-year-old woman that wants to watch Sims porn? Either's
going to ensure that I'm single for a long time. Do you know what I mean? But it popped up. Pardon the phrasing. And I was like, that's like a whole other thing as well. Like, and again, that comes down to a control thing of being able to control the actions of two digital on-screen personas, which is weird. Like I said, sex positive, do what you want, but to me, it's weird. It's a little bit creepy. Going, I can control these people and this is what I want them to do.
Like a porn choose your own adventure.
Yeah.
They have those coming up on I play Homescapes, which is a great game, by the way. You refurbish somebody's house online. Not a person, but a cartoon. Anyway, and in between them, all the adverts come up and they're horrible. They're like these women who are like crying and pregnant. And then then her husband pops up, who just so happens to be a werewolf. I don't know why. And she's like, do I keep my baby or do I sleep with my werewolf husband or something like that? And that's the choice you have to make.
They pop up on my Instagram and I don't know why the hell they're there, but they are.
So weird.
That's bizarre.
What have you been Googling to get those ads through your, what are your algorithms doing? What's going on?
going to say something's fed
scary.
into the algorithm there if you're getting them regularly, especially. I do think there's something analogous between this idea of that campaign about the sort of sex robot sort of litigation, etc., and the sort of legalization of sex work and how we legislate and manage is the wrong word, but how sex work is the sort of the legal frameworks or lack thereof, and how sex workers can be supported and have agency. Because I think there are things to do with the selling of a human body, the gaze through which bodies are seen, etc., that is really damaging and does really perpetuate incredibly toxic things. But the people, the owners of those bodies, the people themselves, having the ownership over those things, having legal frameworks to be able to do those things safely, are obviously better than the idea of it being something that's pushed underground or is illegal to buy and to sell. Do you know what I mean? So I think there's something where it mirrors that almost, where there needs to be some discussion about it and some legal framework to protect everyone involved, even if what is being sold isn't always you know, a feminist to its core. Do you know what I mean? Like, even if there is something problematic with the transaction, surely we should make sure that everyone is protected and capable of making those choices safely.
Yeah. I think the biggest problem that we face is that we don't know what's going to happen. Is that, you know, I can turn around and be like, so guys, what legislation do we need to bring in? Like, what's going to help all these problems that we've brought up? We don't know, because we don't know what they're going to do yet. Yeah. We don't know what's going to happen.
And I think the problem is as well that people who are developing AI, especially in this sort of niche, well, not so niche maybe, but sort of the world of sex robots, because it is more taboo and therefore less publicly talked about, aren't going to be like, let me promote and tell you exactly what I'm doing, because they want to keep sort of any new technology, any advances in AI under wraps. They want to be able to sort of have like proprietary ownership, etc. So it's not something that's happening in the open. Those developments are going to happen behind closed doors. And then because of the sort of societal attitudes to someone who would purchase a sex robot, that then pushes it further into the, you know, into the shadows, which isn't helping anyone.
Karis has just asked, but is it then too late to put anything in place when they're already established?
Well, yeah,
potentially, probably.
You have to have a license to buy a gun.
Pardon?
I said you have to have a license to buy a gun.
Are you saying you need a license? You should have a license to buy a sex robot?
No, I'm not saying. No, I don't think you have to have a license. But I think, I don't know. I'm talking about like when Karis said, you know, they're already established. So what can you do in terms of safeguarding that?
I mean, I don't know.
No, I don't know either, love.
Yeah, that's a tricky one, because it feels a bit chicken and the egg.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what to put in place for it to be kind of like what needs to be put in place, or why that would need to be put in place.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it comes back to the whole idea of robots having rights as well. And this idea of, if we introduce that, we can then kind of figure out what their rights need to be, how then that robots need to be programmed in order to make sure that those rights are maintained. So, for instance, if someone does harm it or treat it in a way we deem unfit, then there are consequences. And to be fair, they're robots. So if we did that, they could literally just send a message. Like, it's a quicker process. I think that would be the only way you could. I don't know. Personally, I have no idea.
I do think the rights for robots thing is a really interesting thing, because so much of every part of our life is being computerized, and that we haven't reached a point where we've created sentience, but we might. And so maybe we do need to put the framework in place, as Kara says, before it's too late, before we, you know, reach that point. I mean, I think when we reach that point, they rise up and get rid of us all, right? But you know, or we have reached that point and they're living among us, who knows.
As I peel off my skin.
It's like Rachel, was it you telling me you'd seen a conspiracy theory that the reason we'd been put into lockdown wasn't because there was a virus, but so they could change the batteries in the pigeons?
Yeah, the birds work for the bourgeoisie.
Jesus Christ.
Which I really enjoy as a conspiracy theory.
Oh.
Time to change all the batteries. They've been going for a while now.
I really like that. Cool.
Oh, for the love of Christ.
No, what next? No, I have loads. Yeah, no, I think going back to Karis's thing is that we don't want to end up with having to find a cure. It's preventative. We need to do preventative measures first, and we need to model that on a system that potentially already exists. Don't know.
Yeah.
I think I don't know what my knowledge of robotics isn't.
No, but I think that maybe we're not the people to solve this. You know, I think we need some experts on robotics and AI. We need some experts on human psychology, and I think maybe we need some sex workers, because I think their perspective is going to be analogous to what if a sex robot gains sentience.
Yeah.
And the person that's going to understand them the most is, you know, a prostitute or a someone who's working in a similar industry.
And that's the thing that I don't think we've talked about that I just suddenly thought of then. You know, when Tesco got the self-service and everyone was like, that's it now. Cashiers are out of a job. Linda's done, like gone. That's the thing, isn't it? Sex robots. There's going to be sex workers who are going to lose money and lose their job because of things like this.
There's a huge argument, so it's weird because it kind of puts itself for and against in an odd way, because obviously, as you said, you know, people are going to be out of a job, but on the other hand, people are arguing that it's going to be safer.
I was going to say people might be out of a job, but it's an incredibly unsafe job to have. Do you know what I mean? Like the people who are most at risk in many ways.
But it's not just safer for the sex workers, it's safer for the clients.
Yeah.
It's also, so there are arguments in terms of if you haven't had sex, so if you're a virgin and you're seeking a sexual experience and you decide to do it with the robot first because the robots are programmed, so therefore there's less embarrassment because you're not embarrassing yourself in front of someone. It can figure out a program for you. So what would suit your needs at this time. But I have an issue with that because I'm like, everyone needs to do the bumbling around in the dark.
Well, I have a question
100%.
about, I realise virginity is a concept that we sort of made up and people define very differently. But is having sex with a robot losing your virginity?
Good point. That's different for every person, isn't it? Depends on what you would consider.
Because I realise that
your virginity.
The whether you've lost your virginity or not is such a grey area and such a lot of bullshit anyway. But you know, I don't know. It's bizarre. I just want to go to, there are a couple of questions that have come up, one of which came up a while ago when we haven't had a pause, but I wanted to say that Phil Airy has asked, can you get a virus off a robot? I think probably have different types of viruses that, you know, oh my gosh, imagine if your sex robot got hacked.
That's a big thing. It's a big thing because bear in mind, if the ones who are learning everything about you and they have to do everything in order to find out literally every single detail, so not only can they hack all of your information and all of your data, but also what could they then go on to do, and who's going to have that information, and can that
persuade you to do something? If you've got someone that says hello to you every day and you creepy. But also I from a can you get a virus perspective, I don't know STI wise what, maybe they must be made of materials which don't,
you could wash it, like I think it's
but I also I was just thinking, I mean, obviously, you know, this is why I'm not in making sex robots for a living, but it's like, I just had to think of, obviously they'd have to be bloody waterproof, wouldn't they? Because if you get that wet and that short circuits and your balls deep in, you're going to be dead.
I don't know that's quite how it would work.
Wow.
I think some of the other questions that have come up that I think they're interesting is we're talking about sort of the impact on sex workers and on prostitution, etc. Lou Yates has asked, is it the same clients though? Which I think is a good question. I don't think we necessarily know enough about it. And Maddie's put a really interesting and I think really nicely phrased thing about the idea of losing virginity and the idea of your first experiences. And she said, I think those first experiences are things we need to do with another human. That embarrassment and awkwardness is shared. We begin to explore our relationship with consent and pleasure and generosity. And I do think those are really important in terms of sort of social development and sort of the social side of sex. I think she's absolutely now on the head. I think there's a really important thing there.
Yeah, definitely.
And Jess is asking, is there a world in which they could be used educationally for people to learn safe kink practices or help break down anxieties around intimacy?
Again, it's relating it back to the idea of using them in a therapeutic sense, which I definitely think there's scope out there for, and the idea of breaking down anxieties around intimacy and all of those sort of things, particularly, you know, for people, yet again, a trigger warning, everybody, for people who have faced sexual abuse or in those sort of areas of their life, to be able to break down those barriers safely and not have the risk of human connection in those moments, which can be really vulnerable and really terrifying for some people.
And also, I think Jess talking about sort of kink practice, the idea of having that safety net where if you go too far or if you do the wrong thing, you're not damaging another person.
Yeah.
That there's a learning curve there. There might be some use in that, but I do think you're right. It all comes back to the same questions.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff.
It really is. It's something that you could talk for days about, isn't it, really? And unpacking it all. And I think that is the interesting yet worrying thing, is that we don't know where it's going to go and how far it's going to go, and only time will tell, really.
It's all still very much in its infancy, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And like it's been around for a while now, but it's only really coming to kind of the mainstream.
I mean,
recently,
every step we take forward with technology, every new invention, humans have found a way to fuck it.
Yeah, pretty much. So,
and on that note,
saying that, I have to share this with you because I found this and I broke down. One of the sex doll manufacturers, so they get loads of weird requests, like, as you can imagine, like some people want like vampires and whatever, but there was this one client who had bought a few things off them, had a foot fetish, which they were fully aware of by that point, but basically asked, could you put a vagina in a foot so that he could fuck it? And he did, and it's hilarious, and I encourage you all to Google it.
Really interesting to me that they would make it a vagina and not a special sort of foothold.
No, it's vagina. So I mean, I just like, there's something fascinating about the human brain that somewhere someone has gone, I want to put my dick in a foot. Like, what is that thought process?
If you're not hurting another person and that's what gets you going, then absolutely go for it.
I kind of appreciate that more though, because it's not like it's a full body. It's not like it's in the abstract.
Yeah,
like it's a weird thing that you particularly want, and if they can make that, you crack on, you live your life, you treat yourself. So that weird little project, but for me, that is more acceptable than
there is something weirdly glorious about being able to realize a fantasy like that. Do you know what I mean? Like, do you be able to, something that no one has that. That's not, oh, I've got a weird kink, I'm into this, very unusual thing that only some people. No, this is totally imagined. But unrealistic body standards. That's all I'm going to say.
We're dreaming of summer. That's what Louisa said.
I think we ought to wrap it up shortly.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any final thoughts?
I mean, I don't think I will shake the thought of a vagina in a foot
You're welcome.
for quite a while.
Google
The
it.
big question that I have is, where is the vagina?
Oh my
Is
god!
it on the sole? Is it on top?
It's on
Is it
top.
like the leg? Like,
So imagine. So right, I was gonna try and like, I can't bend like that. So that shit, that your foot's kind of flat, and then your ankle's up there. It's in like the top of
this
your
bit?
ankle. I'm pointing,
Yeah.
but you can't see where I'm pointing. So no,
This pointing at your feet is going to be really good for people that listen to this podcast.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
And especially, and it'll make great viewing for anybody who does have a foot kink.
Yeah, exactly. You'll find the link to our OnlyFans in.
I mean, it's hard times. We've got to diversify our income streams.
Exactly.
Well, we'll all go and Google what that looks like.
And I've no doubt a lot of today's listeners will be Googling away while I could pick a better phrase. They'll be Googling afterwards. All of the wonderful things that we've been talking about today. Like you said, I definitely think there is, please behave yourselves. We've shown
Sorry,
such
I
great-
just Googled it to see pictures and they use the word vajankles.
That's what it's called. It's called a vajangle.
That is awful.
It's incredibly creepy and I'm not on board with it. I'm so
Okay.
sorry to shame anyone with this fetish, but it's not for me and I don't like it.
A vajankle.
Vajankle.
But I do appreciate the word. And the fact that this article has got a full screen image that they've then pixelated.
God.
Anyway.
I do feel like we could talk about this forever because it is a fascinating subject, but we are going to leave it there for today on vajankles. Who knew that this is where we would end up?
I did.
Either way, it's been glorious. Thank you so much, Ellie, for joining us today. And of course, thank you, Sarah and Lizzie, for being part of the conversation. That is all we've really got time for this week. We have put the PayPal in our description link for this video. If you enjoy our podcast and you want to help us keep making them into the future, please, please, please spare whatever you can and pop it in there. But if not, that's cool. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next Saturday.
See you then.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a nice evening. Happy Googling. Vajankles.
So sorry.
Behave yourself.
Vajankles.
Vajankle.
What a fantastic word vajankle is.